Glory to God. Amen. Yesterday we began the School of the Prophets 2024, and by the grace of God, God's servants began with the principles. And usually when we begin the School of the Prophets or any prophetic occupying school, one of the things that we try to do is to begin with the fundamentals so that the people of God will be rooted and grounded in the Word of God, so that we would all know that the prophetic is indeed scriptural and that Jesus Christ will be our foundation. So in this morning's session, we would begin a different module. Last night we began with the principles, and this morning we'll be beginning with the processes of the prophets. The processes of the prophets. This is the next module. And the topic I will be considering is the way up the mountain. The way up the mountain of the prophets. And we'll be looking at Elisha's voyage. The way up the mountain of the prophets, Elisha's voyage. Glory to God. Please, you may have your seats. Anything that God does in the realm of men, anything that God does that entails him using man to accomplish involves a process. And what is a process? The processes of God are pathways and systems that are designed by God to facilitate reformation and transformation. And the end product of such a process is the revelation of Jesus Christ and his people. And to simply put, process is the pathway to purpose. Your process is the pathway to your purpose. The processes that God takes us through are journeys, and these journeys are like a voyage into the world of the unknown. We do not know what God will reveal. We do not know what God will do with us. We do not know where he will lead us, just like Abraham. And one of the major things that such processes entails is the loss of the life of self, that is the life of the flesh, and at the same time gaining or embracing the life of Christ. That the flesh will no longer rule over us, but that we will be led by God's Spirit, as Paul says in Romans chapter 8, verse 14. One major feature or characteristic, one major thing that characterizes the processes of God is the death to self. If God is processing you, then the flesh is dying. If the flesh is being emboldened and growing and increasing, and you claim to be under God's process, I'm sorry, that process is not being facilitated by the Spirit of the Lord. Your ship has a different captain. Even as we begin, by way of introduction, we would be considering Elisha. Now, for the whole of my message will be in two parts. I'm going to take the first session here and now, and by God's grace, whatever is left, we'll cover that tomorrow night in my next session, where we still continue with processes. And in both messages, we will be looking at the man Elisha. When I began to prepare for this School of the Prophets over a year ago, I think just after the School of the Prophets 2022, and for processes, the Lord told me to consider the person of Elisha. I had it in my diary, I forgot. I didn't remember. And then weeks ago, when I began to prepare again for this School of the Prophets, the Lord said to me, Elisha. And I went back to my old notes, and all of a sudden, because I had a draft, and I checked my draft, and I saw that I wrote Elisha. I wrote about Elisha and then wrote Bible verse and I was like, wow. The voice of God is consistent. The voice of God is consistent. Hallelujah. So by way of introduction, we will begin to look at Elisha's recruitment and separation. 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 16. So we'll jump from verse 16 to 19 to 21. We will be reading a lot of scriptures, and for that reason, I would like to jump certain verses so we don't read the whole thing for time's sake. 1 Kings 19, verse 16, then from verse 19 to verse 21. Verse 16 says, also you shall anoint Jehu, the son of Nimshi, as king over Israel. When you begin to read from chapter 19, verse 1, you would see that something happened. Ahab reported what Elijah had done to Jezebel, and Jezebel vowed to handle and deal with the man, Elijah. And then he ran for his life. In the process, God encountered him and he complained. They have broken your covenant, they've torn down your altars, they've killed your prophets. I alone am left, they seek to take my life. And when God asked him the second time, if you read from verse 1 of chapter 19, you will see that he reiterated the same thing, using the exact same words that he used. And then God began to give him his final orders and told him of the people to anoint. Elijah began the work, but he had to take 3 people to continue the work. The prophet, Elisha, Hazael, and then Jehu. Verse 16, also you shall anoint Jehu the son of Nimshi as king over Israel, and Elisha the son of Shaphat of Abel Meholah you shall anoint as prophets in your place. Verse 19, so he departed from there and found Elisha the son of Shaphat, who was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen before him, and he was with the 12th. Then Elijah passed by him and threw his mantle on him. One of the first things we can see here about the man, Elisha, was that his recruitment was God ordained. Elisha's recruitment into the prophetic stream or into the prophetic line was God ordained. It was not because of Elijah's personal preference. Neither was it a product of Elisha's personal ambition. God ordained it. Hence, Elijah went to anoint him. And the fact that Elisha had already been selected by God did not mean that he did not need to complete the process, to go through process and complete the journey, to see the journey through with Elijah in order to fulfill God's purpose. Elisha had to go through the process of discipleship, and he also had to pass the tests of discipleship in order to fulfill, qualify, and accomplish God's purpose. Yesterday, the man of God said that God does not call the qualified, he qualifies the called. The process of discipleship is one major way that God qualifies us for his purpose. And as we'll see as we proceed, if Elisha had chosen to stop along the way and not complete the journey with Elijah, though the purpose had been foreordained, he would not have received Elijah's mantle. Many times when we study God's word, we do not consider other possibilities. We just straight up. But the Bible tells us details concerning the lives of individuals, of people. The reason why Elisha received the mantle upon Elijah, one, we've said that it was because it was ordained by God. But then secondly, he needed to complete the process of discipleship, of followership, in order to be qualified, in order to be worthy to receive that mantle. It was not because there were no other sons of the prophets, as we'll see as we proceed from 2 Kings 2. There were sons of the prophets in various cities, in Gilgal, in Jericho, in Bethel. But God deliberately singled him out. Perhaps you are aware that God has called you. It is not because God did not see anyone else. It is not because God is experiencing a shortage of humans to use or people to use. He has chosen you as his choice. Elisha needed to complete the journey to fulfill an assignment that had been foreordained by God. It is necessary to complete the process of discipleship in order to fulfill the assignment that has been foreordained by the Lord. Many times we think that because we receive prophecies, oh, you would be a great prophet, you would be a great apostle. In fact, he may even get the term GOAT, the greatest of all time, as they use in sports. He may get that terminology used for you. You may have loads and loads of visions, loads and loads of dreams. People may have given you tons and tons of prophetic words concerning your calling, concerning your assignment. But one thing is certain. Nobody's future is set in stone. Nobody's future is set in stone. It is all conditional. Your destiny is a destination you arrive at because you followed God's prescribed pathway. Your destiny is a destination you arrive at simply because the pathway that you followed was the one that the Lord prescribed. And for this, let's look at 1 Samuel chapter 13, verses 13 and 14. And Samuel said to Saul, "You have done foolishly. You have not kept the commandments of the Lord your God, which he commanded you. For now the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. But now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought for himself a man after his own heart. The Lord has commanded him to be commander over his people because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you." Saul's destiny was truncated because of his disobedience. What this tells us is that obedience is a strong requirement to fulfill God's call. On the journey of discipleship, there will be commands. There will be instructions. On the journey of process to fulfill God's purpose, there will be commands, there will be instructions given to you by the Lord, and it is necessary for us to obey in order to still remain on that pathway. As we can see here in the case of Saul, it was his disobedience that took him outside that pathway that God had designed for him. What did he say? For now the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. In other words, at that time, Saul was just king, with a possibility of his kingdom being established in Israel forever. But what did he now say also? But now your kingdom shall not continue. What took him out of the path? It was disobedience. Let's go back to 1 Kings 19. Continue from verse 20. 1 Kings 19, continuing from verse 20. Verse 20, and it says, "And he left the oxen and ran after Elijah and said, 'Please let me kiss my father and my mother, and then I will follow you.'" Where else do we see this? We see this in the script, in the Gospels, Matthew and Luke. For time's sake, we will not go into that. And he said to him, "Go back again, For what have I done to you? Why did Elijah respond to Elisha this way? The essence of the mantle being cast upon Elisha is that Elisha would follow Elijah. But how come Elijah now said to him, go back again, for what have I done to you? Because he said, I want to go kiss my father and my mother goodbye. What did Jesus say? When he was calling individuals and they were giving excuses. One said, I want to go and bury my father. Another said, let me go and tell my father and my mother goodbye. One of the responses that Jesus gave to such people was that he that puts his hand on the plow and looks back is not fit for the kingdom. And it is the same principle that we're seeing here. If time permits me in the next session, perhaps towards the end, I would do a comparison to see how the life of Elijah and Elisha mirrors that of Christ and his disciples. As a student of God's word, you should understand that from Genesis to Revelation, the Bible speaks about just one man, and that is the man Jesus. That was why when John the Beloved was beginning the book of Revelations, he said, the revelation of who? Jesus Christ. Verse 21, so Elisha turned back from him and took a yoke of oxen and slaughtered them and boiled their flesh using the oxen's equipment and gave it to the people and they ate. Then he arose and followed Elijah and became his servant. Fulfilling God's call requires separation. Fulfilling the call of God requires a very high level of separation. And this separation implies that there are certain things in your life that you need to let go of in order to be able to fulfill God's purpose for you. We'll just speak about three things. Let us speak three things that Elisha had to leave behind. One of the first things that we can see that Elisha left behind was wealth. Wealth. The Bible speaks of 12 yokes of oxen. One yoke of oxen equals 2 oxen. And so do the maths, in all you have 24 oxen. Because if you read properly in the verses before, you would see that Elisha was over the people. He was over the servants. He was over the workers. In other words, Elisha was not a poor man. He was not someone that had no life, that had nothing doing. And God just went to call someone that had nothing to do. He had to leave wealth. And the second thing we can also pick from his life to see what he had to leave was his profession, his farming profession. He had to leave that. These are examples of certain things. This list is not exhaustive, but these are examples of the kind of things that the Lord would have us lay down, let go of, to fulfill his call on the journey that is process. Thirdly, he had to let go of sentimental attachments. He had to leave father and mother. And father and mother there are symbolic of sentimental attachments, sentimental ties. To fulfill God's call for your life, there are certain relationships that you may need to let go of. And these relationships may not be with people that may really be unbelievers. They may even be believers. And the Lord would have you let go of such relationships. In fact, generally speaking, if you consider your life, they may not even be bad people. Look at Lot. What do we see in the Bible that tells us that from the very beginning, when Abraham took Lot, that Lot was a bad person? No. But he had to let go of that. And we saw the consequence, or we saw the implication of him letting go of Lot from the book of Genesis. There are a number of reasons why God would have us let go of sentimental attachments. One of such reasons may be that your time in that relationship may be up. And God may be reassigning you to new people, to different people, to other people. It is not every relationship that we get into that is meant to be for life. There are some relationships that are meant to just be with you. You're meant to have for a year or a couple of years. And then as time goes on, you will notice that those relationships are no longer relevant in your life and you let go of it. You don't struggle to keep the relationships. And there are even such relationships that we may treasure. Can we say that Abraham did not treasure his relationship with Lot? No. There may even be relationships that we treasure, but the Lord may be telling you, let go of such a relationship. Secondly, toxic relationships. Some relationships may be toxic. You may be in a relationship with people that do not encourage you. They never edify you. Anytime you are with them, they pull you down. Your life is ascending. You're ascending. And each time they come back into your life, you go back to ground zero. It feels like you always have to restart and start all over again. Perhaps you used to womanize or drink and all that, and you gave your life to Christ, you became committed to the Lord. And each time this old friend comes back, you always find yourself returning to the same vices. Such relationships, they are toxic. They are not only toxic to you as an individual, but they are toxic to your destiny. There are relationships that may not seem toxic in the moment, but they may be toxic to your future. Again, looking at the example of Abraham and Lot. God stopped speaking to Abraham until he separated from Lot. Abraham just gave Lot, choose wherever you want to go. And Lot looked at the one that looked obviously nice, the greatest, the most beautiful pasture, and he took it. The moment he left, God began to speak to Abraham. There are certain relationships that may be toxic to your destiny that God may need you to let go of. Thirdly, there is the unexplainable reason. God may just give you a command and you may see no reason. This person is nice. This person helped me when I was in school. When I was in this tough time, this person was there to lift me up. This person saw me through hardships. If I can count the most difficult phases of my life, this person was there with me. But how can God now be saying that I should leave this person? Perhaps it is not the Lord. Remember, just like God's servant said yesterday, God does not always have to explain himself. He does not owe you an explanation. He speaks and we have to obey. When God explains himself to you, it's a privilege. It's not a right. Have there been times that God has explained himself to me? Yes, he has. Do I consider it a right? No. Why? Because it is a privilege. And then there are many times that he does not explain himself to me. He gives me an instruction. I obey. And after obeying, all of a sudden I see the results. Oh, wow, this was what God wanted to happen. This was what God wanted me to do. This was God knew was going to happen had I not done this. He does not need us to require an explanation from him in order to obey. Before we move on to, even as we move on to today's message proper, looking at 2 Kings 2, one thing I would like us to take note of with the life of Elisha is that discipleship is a personal journey. Discipleship is a personal journey. Can we say that Elisha had no friend or had no people in his life? He had no close ties with people that he grew up with in Abel Meholah? We can't say that. No man's an island. But when we look at 2 Kings 2, we will see that Elisha followed Elijah and there was no other friend No colleague, no other person was involved. It was a personal journey that he went on. The process of discipleship is a personal journey that the believer in Christ has to embark on. If the believer can be used in the hand of God. We're in a season when the Lord is recruiting prophets. One of the major words that the Lord has given us concerning this school is that prophets shall be recruited. People shall be recruited into the prophetic stream. And it is important for us to note that this journey, the journey to fulfill God's call, the journey to becoming a prophet, perhaps you're called to be a prophet, that journey is a personal one. And there are times when the road may seem lonely. Your friends may be getting married and you're just the only one there. Your friends may be getting great jobs and you may just be the only one there. Your friends may seem to be moving forward, but it just feel as if the world has gone and then left you behind. Many times it may feel that way. It's a personal journey, which requires commitment on our part. 2 Kings chapter 2 from verse 1 to 14. This will be our main text for the rest of the message. 2 Kings 2 from verse 1 to 14. And it came to pass, when the Lord was about to take up Elijah into heaven by a whirlwind, that Elijah went with Elisha from Gilgal. There are 4 places that Elisha went through with Elijah, as we see in 2 Kings 2. The very first place is Gilgal. And what does Gilgal represent? There are a number of things that the name Gilgal, the place Gilgal, represent in Scripture, but we're going to consider just one of them. 1 Samuel chapter 10, verse 8, 1 Samuel 15, verse 21, and then 1 Samuel 11, from verse 14 to 15. But we'll only be reading the first two. 1 Samuel 10, 8, and then 1 Samuel 15, 21. 10, it says, "You shall go down before me to Gilgal, and surely I will come down to you to offer burnt offerings and make sacrifices of peace offerings. 7 days you shall wait till I come to you and show you what you should do." Then 15 verse 21 says, "But the people took the plunder, sheep and oxen, the best of the things which should have been utterly destroyed, to sacrifice to the Lord your God in Gilgal." One important thing that we see here about the place Gilgal is that Gilgal is the place of sacrifice. We've seen here from those two scriptures, also from 1 Samuel 11, 14 to 15, and then there are other scriptures as well that you can reference, that Gilgal represents the place of sacrifice. Like we've seen from 1 Kings 19, the journey of Elisha began with sacrifice. He had to let go of a number of things. He sacrificed his wealth. What else? His profession. What's the third one? Sentimental attachments, in order to follow God's call for his life. Even as the Lord will be recruiting people into the prophetic stream, we have to realize that sacrifices will be demanded of us. Sacrifices will be demanded of you and me. Following Jesus is not cheap. Following Jesus is not cheap. It is costly. It will cost you. We've seen 3 different things that it cost Elisha. In your own case, maybe 1,000 things, maybe 100 things. And you cannot compare or equate yours with the next person, because your callings are different. The fact that God requires 3 things from one person does not necessarily mean that he would require 3 things from you. Everybody's calling is different. It is tailored by the Lord. The gifts and the callings of God, they are given to us freely. Freely. There are persons that have listened to our messages and or been part of either the previous school of the prophets or even the prophetic working school, and then in the process, giftings are imparted. They begin to see, they begin to hear, they begin to prophesy. It is not hard to receive the gifts of the Spirit. Receiving the gift of the Spirit is about the easiest thing. What matters more is the maintenance culture, stewardship, how you use it. We can say that Saul was anointed king, but it was not hard for God to change the course of everything. Take it from him and give it to his neighbor. We have to be ready to lay down whatever it takes to fulfill the call of God. We have to be ready. We have to be willing. There is always a cost to fulfilling God's purpose for you. The question you can ask yourself is, what would it cost me to fulfill the call of God? Has God called you to be a prophet? Has he called you to be an apostle or an evangelist or a pastor? Perhaps he's outside the fivefold, another functionary. What are you willing to let go of? What are you willing to part ways with in order to fulfill that call of God? It is time to count the costs. When the Lord calls us to fulfill a call for him, he doesn't just call us to make one sacrifice and that is it. He calls us to a life of sacrifice. There is the initial sacrifice that the Lord would demand of you, and there is also the continuous sacrifice that you would also need to make. If you think that one sacrifice will cut it, sorry, you're mistaken. You know, there are times when perhaps God demands something of you, something you consider really, really huge, really big, and then you let go of that thing, and then eventually, I've been there. I'm speaking from experience. You let go of this, you let go of that, you let go of so many things, and you're like, oh, wow, now we've arrived. And then God now comes again. He's making another demand. It is a continuous process. It is not a one-time thing. It is not a one-time offering that's, let me empty my bank account and give it to God. Perhaps this is it. God will know that I am qualified, I'm ready. It is a life of sacrifice that the Lord calls us to. And considering the man Abraham, what was God's instruction to Abraham? Get out of your country, get out of your family, to a land that God will show him. He had to leave all that behind. What was that? It's a sacrifice, right? So he had to let go of those former attachments, the ambitions, the purposes, whatever relationships, everything that was going on. Now, put yourself in his shoes. Perhaps you've been in a place and you've built a life there. You have a wife, you have a family, you have friends, you have businesses or a job. Everything there. Family is there. Extended family is there. Friends are there. God calls him to let go of all that to a land that God will show him. In other words, Abraham was taking a journey into the unknown. It says to a land that God would what? Show him. So in other words, he did not know what would befall him on the way. He had no idea what would happen along the way. But he knew that he was called and he had to let go of certain things. Was that all? No. He got to the promised land. What did he need to let go of? He let go of Lot. Was that all? No. And there was Hagar and Ishmael. And what happened? Another demand. He let go of Hagar and he let go of Ishmael. Was that all? No. Perhaps he has released Hagar and Ishmael. Ishmael is not the one that God will use. Now he has gotten Isaac. Isaac is the one that God would use to fulfill the word that God has given him, the great prophecies. Your descendants will be like the stars of heaven, like the sand by the seashore. God told him to sacrifice Isaac, his only son Isaac. So he went to the mountains of Moriah to sacrifice his son. Do you know that he actually sacrificed Isaac? He actually did. It was figurative. The message there is simple: willingness. We have to be willing to let go of anything that the Lord would require of us in order to fulfill his call. Years ago, we landed in Winnipeg. My wife and I, we landed in Winnipeg from Nigeria. And as we landed here in Winnipeg, well, we're back here now. Glory to God. We landed in Winnipeg and we began to settle down here. We got jobs. Extended family was here. Friends were here. We began to build a life here. Down the road, we got our marching orders. And the Lord said, leave Winnipeg for Ontario. We left Winnipeg for Kingston. My wife knew that it was simply for God's purpose. It was simply for the work of the ministry. We have been on this journey for years. Personally, I've been on this journey for a long time, since I was a teenager. I received God's call upon my life in the mountains of Voyage as a teenager, and I've been on this journey for many years. But the time had now come to launch out. There was a latter phase of process that the Lord would have us undergo. So he sent us out of Winnipeg to a small city of Kingston. Arriving in Kingston, there were many signs. My wife remembers there were many signs, many prophetic signs here and there, both in numbers, in happenings. The route I was going to take was an academic route. When I began my program, to tell you how prophetic it was, one of the signs, I knew beforehand that my supervisor's name was Diane. And of course, what's my wife's name? We had our first meeting, and when we're talking, and then she mentioned Paul, and I looked, I thought she was talking about me, and then she said, no, my husband. I was like, whoa. So we can clearly see one sign. And then there were many other signs that the Lord used to give us comfort, to let us know that you're on the path that I have sent you on. And this is one of the privileges that God gives us. There are times that he gives us signs just to comfort us. The journey may be tough, it may be rough, but he gives us signs to give us encouragement that we will not give up. Our sojourn in Kingston was rough, it was tough, it was harsh. When we were leaving Winnipeg, our twin boys, they were barely 6 months old. And we had help. We had help in Winnipeg. We left all that and then we moved to Kingston. It was harsh, it was tough, it was rough. It was taking its toll on us. But we knew that it was something that was necessary for the call of God. And there in Kingston, a whole lot of things happened. God took us through processes that fine-tuned us and launched us into the ministry. It was in Kingston that I was ordained a prophet. It was in Kingston that I was ordained an apostle. It was in Kingston that my wife was ordained a prophetess. It was a small city. We left the big city. One of the first times that he hit me, it was a small city, was when I was looking for Walmart, and I got to realize that there was just one Walmart there. The point is that fulfilling God's call comes at a cost. It comes at a cost to you. You have to be willing to lay down your life. You have to be willing to lay down whatever it'll take to fulfill that call. Leviticus chapter 5, verse 10. For time's sake, we don't read that. One of the things we see from Leviticus 5, verse 10, is that every sacrifice that we offer to God has to be prescribed. It has to be prescribed. What does it mean that it has to be prescribed? It has to be the doctor's orders. You know, when you go to see a doctor, you're not feeling well, and then the doctor fills a prescription. What does that mean? That is the drug that you're supposed to take. You're not supposed to go over the counter and get something else. The sacrifice has to be prescribed. We cannot offer to God what we think God would like. We cannot offer to God what we think God, what would be a worthy offering. We have lived in Nigeria, and there are many times when you will give a tailor clothes to sew for you, and you will specify the design. You know, they will now make certain adjustments. That I think you will like it. No, God is not like that. It has to be prescribed. And I'd like us to look at one principal example of this. 1 Samuel 15 from verse 20 to 23. This was part of Saul's error. 1 Samuel 15, 20 to 23. Verse 20, and it says, "And Saul said to Samuel, but I have obeyed the voice of the Lord and gone on the mission on which the Lord sent me, and brought back Agag, king of Amalek. I have utterly destroyed the Amalekites, but the people took of the plunder, sheep and oxen, the best of the things which should have been utterly destroyed, to sacrifice to the Lord your God in Gilgal. So Samuel said, has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams. For rebellion is as a sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he also has rejected you from being king." From the life of Saul, we see that offering an unsolicited sacrifice is tantamount to rebellion. A sacrifice that God did not ask for. When you offer an unsolicited sacrifice, an unprescribed sacrifice, a sacrifice that God did not demand of you, it is described here as rebellion. And what did Samuel go further to say? That rebellion is also what? As the sin of witchcraft. So we see from offering unprescribed sacrifices to rebellion and then to witchcraft. What is the connection? When people practice witchcraft, one of the things that they do is that they offer sacrifices to idols. They offer sacrifices to idols. They need something to be done. Blood must be spilled. Sacrifice a neighbor, sacrifice a family member, sacrifice an animal. When they practice witchcraft, sacrifices are made to demons. In other words, when a person offers to God an unprescribed sacrifice, that person is practicing witchcraft. It is what Samuel said, not my words. Saul offered an unprescribed sacrifice, and he considered it what? Rebellion, which is also witchcraft. When you offer to God a sacrifice he did not ask for, what you are doing is not offering a sacrifice to God, you are offering a sacrifice to demons. And this was the reason why in Leviticus chapter 10 from verse 1 to 2, what happened? The Bible said that Nadab and Abihu offered profane fire to the Lord, and what did the Lord do in retaliation? Fire went out from the Lord and it consumed them. That was not prescribed. It is a dangerous thing to offer sacrifices to God which he did not ask for. It is a dangerous thing to offer sacrifices to God which he did not demand for. God is long-suffering. God is long-suffering. Oh, God is long-suffering and he is so gracious. Many times we do things and we get away with them. We do bad things, wrong things, and we get away with them because we see no immediate consequences the way it happens in the Old Testament or in the early church. Then we think that it is okay. We think that God is comfortable with it. But it is simply because God is long-suffering. Be careful when they tell you that to get power, to obtain power, this power, there are many powers. To obtain one power, fast for 21 days. Fast for 70 days. If you go on this 40-day fast, it is a kind of power that you will touch. There is a realm that you will enter that you have never entered before. Be careful. Because you will be digging your own grave. People have been destroyed like that. The fact that you did it, you heard someone say it, this is a method. Where is it in scripture? Where is it in the Bible? The Bible says that Elijah went for 40 days. But before he went for that 40 days, what happened? He ate angel food. So for that 40 days, he didn't. When Moses was on the mount for how many days with the Lord? When he was there, he was with the Lord. He did not need to come down to come and try to. Well, he was with the Lord. He stayed in God's presence, and God's presence was sustained him. God has to ask for it. In the previous school of the prophets, I shared certain examples, personal examples of certain things that happened regarding fasts and all that. How God gave me an instruction, do 40 days for this, I did the 40 days. Do another 40 days for that, I did the 40 days. And then the next time he now came to me, I was expecting that he was going to say, go for another 40 days. No, it was so much more shorter than that. I was like, oh, no, it's not in your fast. It is in your obedience to the instruction. Many times we think that we need to offer something. If I give God this one, if the bank account of the pastor, it will shake. Even God will hear it. No, it has to be prescribed. How does God lead us? Yes, it can be by visions, it can be by dreams, revelations, prophecies. And there may be times that it may be through none of those things. Because Paul said in Romans 8:14 that we are to be led by God's Spirit. You may just know, you may just have that knowing intuitively that I should do this. I believe that God wants me to do this, then you do it. And many times, many of the fastings and the long prayers, protracted prayers that people embark on, what is the goal? What is the goal? Is it bragging rights to claim that I have already done I've gone 24 hours? Have you gone 24 hours? You read the Bible cover to cover in a month. I've read it cover to cover. Have you done it? That is trash. It has to be prescribed. We have to give to God what he demands of us, not what we think he would need. Recently, while preparing for a sermon, as I was preparing for the sermon, I was on a fast. And while I was on the fast, I was really hungry. But I kept going. I just kept studying. I felt I needed to maybe get to a certain point and all that, but God spoke to me. He said, go and eat something. What was his words? He said, go and eat something and I will speak to you further on this sermon. So I just quickly tried to, wrap up before I go. Although he did not speak. Nothing flowed. That roadblock that I hit before, I was still there. But the very moment I went to the kitchen, I took an apple. I was washing apple. The Lord just began to speak instantly. Don't think that it is your fast. Don't think that it is your effort. It is by grace. It is by the grace of God. It's not by effort. He began to speak, and as he began to speak, scriptures began to connect. Scriptures began to connect. Everything that was hidden became unveiled to me. And the remaining part of the message was just connected. Let's move on to verse 2, even as I begin to wrap up. Verse 2 of 2 Kings chapter 2. Then Elijah said to Elisha, stay here, please, for the Lord has sent me to Bethel. But Elisha said, as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, I will not leave you. So they went down to Bethel. The second part of this verse is something we'll look at in the next message by God's grace. What does Bethel stand for? Genesis chapter 28, verse 10 to 12, and from verse 17 to 19. Genesis 28, from verse 10 to 12, and from 17 to 19. Verse 10. Now Jacob went out from Beersheba and went toward Haran. So he came to a certain place and stayed there all night because the sun had set. And he took one of the stones of that place and put it at his head, and he lay down in that place to sleep. 12. Then he dreamed, and behold, a ladder was set up on the earth, and its top reached to heaven. And there the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And he was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? Verse 17. This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. Then Jacob rose early in the morning and took the stone that he had put at his head, set it up as a pillar, and poured oil on top of it. And he called the name of that place Bethel, but the name of that city had been Luz previously. Bethel is the house of God. Jacob began his stay overnight with a stone for a pillow. And that overnight stay ended up with realization that he was in the house of God. But he began with a stone for a pillow. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 5 says that we as living stones are being built up into a spiritual house. So God desires to use us as lively stones for the building of his house. 1 Chronicles 21, 25 to 26, and then 2 Chronicles 3, verse 1. I'd like us to make a comparison here. 1 Chronicles 21, 25 to 26, and then 2 Chronicles 3, verse 1. Verse 25, it says, so David gave Ornan 600 shekels of gold by weight for the place, and David built there an altar to the Lord and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings, and called on the Lord, and he answered him from heaven by fire on the altar of burnt offerings. Just to refresh our minds about this story, David had gone on to number Israel. And after numbering Israel, there were consequences for his actions. In order to stop the angel of judgment from executing God's judgment upon the people of Israel, he needed to offer a sacrifice, and Ornan was going to give him his land for free. But he said, I will not offer to God a sacrifice that costs me nothing. And here we've seen that David built there an altar to the Lord and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. What do we see here? Sacrifice, like we saw before. Then 2 Chronicles chapter 3, verse 1. Now Solomon began to build the house of the Lord at Jerusalem on Mount Moriah, where the Lord had appeared to his father David, at the place that David had prepared on the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. The house of God was built where? On the same spot where David offered sacrifices to God. So here we're seeing a progression from sacrifice to what? To the house of God, to the building of the house of God. We began from where? Gilgal. And we said that that represented what? Sacrifices. And now we've moved on to Bethel, that is the house of God. And we're seeing the same comparison here in the life of David and of Solomon. David offered sacrifice on one spot, Mount Moriah, on a field, on a place, portion of land that belonged to Ornan the Jebusite, and it was on the same spot that Solomon now came to do the building of the house of God. Note that in Genesis chapter 22, it was on the same mount that the Lord instructed Abraham to offer up his son, Isaac. Sacrifice again. So Bethel is that place of transition from sacrifice to the building of the house of God. And one major way we contribute to the building of God's house is through service. It is through service. In addition to learning to live a life of sacrifice, we have to learn to live a life of service on the journey of process. On the journey of the process, that is the pathway that leads to purpose. We have to become living stones that can be deployed by God at any time for his building work. Remember that in 2 Kings chapter 3, verse 11, Elisha was also described as the man, the one that poured water on the hands of Elijah. In other words, he served. So Bethel is the place of service. We live in a generation where everybody wants to have their name on something. Everybody wants to be an entrepreneur. Everybody wants to start something. Everybody wants to be a CEO. Everybody wants to be a content creator. Everybody wants to have their name on the brand. Everybody wants to be a brand ambassador, or, just do something online where you're now the person in vogue and people will now flock in your direction. We live in a generation where everybody wants to have their name on something. But God's way, like God's servant said previously, his way is faceless and nameless. His way is faceless and nameless. It's not about names, titles, identities. Sacrifice and service, they are part of the ladder that leads up to the mountain of the prophets. And previously, in the last school of the prophets, when we talked about service, we talked about 4 T's. So if you're going to serve, then you have to be ready to commit in 4 areas: your time, your talents, your treasure, and your temple. Your time, of course, we know what time is. Your treasure, your financial possessions. Your talent, that is your giftings, your abilities, your skill. And then your temple, that is yourself. Service is a life. Service is a life that God calls us to. It is not a one-time thing. Oh, I served here. My days of service are over. I served here, I served there. No. When we look through the book of the epistles, we will see that the apostles in the early church, when Paul began to write, when James began to write, when Peter wrote, how did they introduce themselves? As bond servants, not just as servants, but as bond servants of Christ Jesus. They introduced themselves not by great titles, by the disciples that saw the Lord face to face, disciples that fellowshiped with the Lord, disciples that were with the Lord on the Mount of Transfiguration. No. What did they identify themselves as? As bond servants. And that was a common denominator among the different epistles by the apostles. You will see it. James, a bond servant of Jesus Christ. Paul, a bond servant of Jesus Christ. What does it mean to be a bond servant? A bond servant is a willful slave. A bond servant is a slave that the master has released. You can go. But the slave come back and say, no, I submit, I just yield. A bond servant is a willful slave, a person that willfully yields and submits. That I want to be your slave. I want to be your servant. This was how the disciples in the early church lived. They did not identify themselves by their titles and whatnot. They did not identify themselves by, I'm a son. Who are you? I'm a son. Sonship is not the greatest thing. If it was the greatest thing, they would have identified themselves as sons of God. But they did identify themselves as bond servants. So bond service is a level that is beyond discipleship, is beyond being a disciple, it is beyond being a son. A bond servant is a willful slave. As a bond servant, you have no life, you have no ambition, you have no purpose of your own. There's no ambition of your own, there's no life of your own. What do you want to do? It is simple. What does God want to do? You only live for God's pleasure. You come to a point where your life is now lived only for God's pleasure and not for your own ambition, not for your own purpose. Oh, I have this goal. Before I hit 30, I need to do this. Before I hit 40, I need to do that. What is God requiring of you? Bethel is a place of service. And there are different levels of service. There are degrees of service. But your service should come to that point where you become a bond servant, fully committed. Your life is for the Lord. What did Jesus say to Peter? When you were little, you went wherever you wanted. When you grow old, you will be led. It is that place where you have you do not have your own will, you do not have your own direction. It is the direction of the Spirit of God. It is where the Spirit of God is going that you're going. It is what the Spirit of God wants to do that you do. You love what He loves, You hate what He hates. His ambition becomes your own ambition. Your daily desire is, Lord, what do you want me to do? Lord, what is on your heart? What do you desire to accomplish in my family, in my home, in this city that you have sent me to? You're not looking for the next big thing. Can we just begin to pray? Can we just talk to God? Talk to the Lord. Say, Lord, I commit. I commit myself to your processes. I commit myself to the processes of your Spirit. I commit myself to the path that you have designed for me. Not my will, but yours be done. Not my will, but yours be done. Whatever it is that you need, Lord, I am ready. Think about it deeply. Are you ready to give it up? What are you ready to give up? What are you ready to let go of? Elisha, he let go of his wealth. He let go of his profession. He let go of sentimental attachments. He left his family behind. The Lord separated him for a purpose. What are you willing to let go of? Think about it deeply and say, Lord, I am willing. If indeed you are willing, say, Lord, I am willing. Lord, I am willing. Whatever it'll take, whatever it'll cost me, whatever you demand of me, Lord, I am willing. Lord, I am ready. It is a life of sacrifice. The process is a life of sacrifice. The path that God has set us on is also a life of service, one that should end in being a bond servant of Christ Jesus. Lord, not my will, but yours be done. Lord, not my will, but yours be done. Lord, beat me into shape. Lord, beat me into shape. Lord, whatever it is in my life that does not please you, I am willing, I am ready. I let go of them. Whatever relationship that you need me to cut off from, whatever ties that you need me to let go of, whatever tie with any individual or with anything that is holding me back or that will hold me back from fulfilling your high calling, I let go. I let go. I lay them down before you. Jesus said that he that puts his hand on the plow and looks back is not fit for my kingdom. Oh, Jesus, I choose to commit. Say, Lord, help me. Lord, help me. I cannot do it on my own. I cannot do it by myself. Lord, help me. You have called me to fulfill your calling. You have called me to fulfill your purpose. You have called me to be a prophet. You have called me to be an apostle. You've called me to be an evangelist. You've called me to disciple people. Oh, Jesus, Lord, help me. I cannot do it on my own. Lord, help me. Lord, help me. Mashkambo satakabahida. Kera na 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 shanda kabala dia satakabahida ba. Mashkonza zebeko ziziano. Rada da 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 sekete krege shanatai. We ask for help. We ask for help, Jesus. We ask for grace. Help us, oh God, to indeed commit. Help us, oh God, to indeed commit. Malando bela na 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 sekrege shanataika. Ebama masuno mena haniango predosko shaiko mena ambaliango vrisco shako ferana haziske shakaikos obera azizi kashkobia aviba ashkeno namasono tokopiro namasodo kofekete kibara na mashanaba. Thank you, Jesus. In a vision, I see an individual, and this individual, I see in the vision that in previous times, the Lord has tried to yoke you. In previous times, he has tried to place his yoke upon you. In previous times, he has tried to place his handcuffs upon you. That you become his servant, that you become his bond servant. But I see in the vision that in former times, you have wandered to the left and you've wandered to the right. You've gone anywhere else other than where God wants you to be. You know, you are certain that God has called you. And you have an idea of the costs of that calling. But you have not committed. You have not placed your hands on the plow. You have not bowed down for the Lord to yoke you. The Lord is calling you. He's calling you. Come back. Come back. Come to me. Come back. Come to me. You have turned to the left. You have turned to the right. You have tried different things. None of them worked. You have tried different things. You never found fulfillment in any of them. You have even tried some so-called religious activities to try to appease me. But my soul, I have never delighted in any of them. And you know it. I am giving you another opportunity and I'm calling you to come back. Return to me. Return to me. Come to that place where I can yoke you. Come to that place where I can break you like a wild horse and I can mount upon you and ride you for myself. Come to that place where I can break you like a wild donkey and ride upon you into the city, as in my triumphant entry into Jerusalem. Come to me, that I may break you. Come to me, that I will mold you. Come to me and I will beat your life into shape. I will beat your life into a shape you never thought was possible. I will beat your life into a shape you never thought was possible. I can just see that God in his mercy granted you a glimpse. It felt like you looked above a fence and you could see into your future, and you were in tears and you were in awe and you were in shock. The Lord says that all my plans, all that I have planned for you, all that I have designed for you, they far exceed your expectations and your ambitions. Your expectations, your ambitions, your personal plans, they do not come close. They do not measure up to that which I have designed for you, for your future. But I need you to come to me, put your hand on the plow, to commit to the process, and let my spirit lead you. And let my spirit lead you. Come to me. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Father. Oh, we give you praise, Jesus. Just worship the name of the Lord. Give him praise. Give him glory. Give him honor. Exalt him. Magnify his holy name. Thank you, Father. Shakai nama sonto kobrana nama shinta kabahida.